Sunset Australia would like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the following program.
Good evening and welcome to Meet the Press. On the eve of the Premier's Conference, the government has all sorts of headaches economically. Both Finance Minister Ralph Willis and Treasurer John Dawkins have cast doubt on Labor's election pledge to cut income tax by $8.6 billion. And now the unions are getting restless as Industrial Relations Minister Laurie Brereton plots a complete overhaul of the government's approach to industrial relations. At risk is the Accord Mark 7 and a planned $8 a week pay rise for low-income workers. Our guest tonight is the Coalition's John Howard, and on the panel, Amanda Buckley from Melbourne's Sunday Age, Edna Carew of the Australian Business Monthly, and Michelle Grattan of the Canberra Times. First of all, Mr. Howard, this doubt that seems to be cast over the tax cuts, what do you think? Do you think they should be dropped?
Well, I'll tell you what, they will be, in one form or another. You can bet your last dollar on that. And the whole of the Fitzgerald caper is all about preparing the public for dropping the tax cuts or jacking up tax. I mean, tax is going up. So just how, when, in what form, what mix of direct and indirect, we're to wait and see. But the Fitzgerald exercise, I mean, that report could have been written on a wet Saturday afternoon.
That's a pretty cynical
well, it is. It is. I mean, I am cynical, forgive me, but that report was commissioned on the 2nd of April, 2.5 weeks after the election. And you're not telling me that Dawkins and Willis and Keating all didn't know broadly the problem with Australian savings. I mean, I knew broadly the problem with Australian savings. I've known it for years. Anybody who's got any understanding of economics in government or in opposition knows the problem with savings in this country. I see that report as very much part of a quite elaborate public relations exercise to prepare people so they'll say, oh, gee, it's the right thing to break your word to the Australian people.
So would the opposition support the repeal of the tax cuts?
Well, we've said that we'll address the budget when the budget is brought down. I mean, I'm not going to give away or express a view as to how we're going to tactically respond to a budget. Obviously, we want the government to cut spending in order to bring the budget into a, healthier deficit position. In other words, a lower deficit. And I think given the way in which wages in Australia are now falling behind other developed countries, wage and salary earners in this country are going to be increasingly leery about governments or indeed any political party that is talking about increasing taxation.
From the point of view of the health of the economy, should the tax cuts be scrapped?
Look, the health of the economy requires a much lower deficit.
And therefore the scrapping of the tax cuts?
Our first preference overwhelmingly is to get expenditure down, and we don't want to do anything that takes the pressure off the government.
But more is needed than just getting expenditure down, isn't it?
Try as hard as you will, I am not going to alter the approach the opposition has quite legitimately taken of saying we will tactically respond to the budget when it comes along. But as far as the deficit is concerned, we want spending cut as the first preference, and I think the Australian public does.
How about a strategy to increase savings by putting those tax cuts into superannuation? What if the government came down with an idea like that?
Well, that's something that we would have to address. I mean, I'm not saying we agree with it, but I think we do have a savings problem in Australia. Although
that would help that savings problem.
Yes, but I think you've got to remember that one of the reasons we have a savings problem in Australia at the moment is that we've gone through a long period of high inflation. And the major reason why a nation's savings ratio runs down is a prolonged bout of high inflation, because it is human nature, when you think the value of your assets are diminishing through inflation, to spend rather than to save. So we may see some turnaround. If you look at the other historically low periods of savings in Australia's history, they've had explanations. So whilst I don't diminish the problem in any way, I think we've got to keep it in perspective.
If the government was taking steps to increase national savings by asking people to put their tax cuts towards superannuation, if it came up with that option, would the opposition think about supporting that?
Look, Amanda, good try, but I mean, I'm really not going to sort of preempt what collectively John Hewson and his colleagues are going to do in response to a proposal. I mean, obviously we'll be sensible and responsible, but equally we have an obligation as an opposition to the Australian public to keep the heat on the government, to not adopt the easy option of cutting the deficit, and that is by jacking up tax.
Aren't we saying, or weren't you saying to start with, that whilst this report has been dressed up as a great thesis, if you like, on Australia's savings problems, it's really being used as a lever to talk about tax and what we should do on tax?
I'm sure. And there's nothing new in it, Edna. I mean, all of these things have been more or less talked about in one form or another. I mean, this is about one of the old sort of Treasury chestnuts of the capital gains tax on the family home. I mean, that will never be introduced in Australia.
It'd be an ideological shift in this country if we had a capital gains tax.
Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, I mean, the real problem with the capital gains is the existing capital gains tax, the way it distorts investment patterns.
It is a shift for the federal government to start talking about giving the states more taxing powers, or wanting them to have more taxing powers, isn't it?
No, I don't think they want them to have more power. They just want them to raise more tax.
To raise more money.
Yeah, they just want them to jack up their charges so the federal government will be absolved. I mean, it's the greatest sort of fiscal cop-out. I mean, they over the last 10 years have put up their spending by 2% in real terms, and they've cut their recurrent payments to the states by an equivalent amount. And now they're saying to the states, you know, you cut the bone even more and you raise more tax so we won't have to go back on a promise we should never have made. I mean, for God's sake.
But you also presumably think that the states should be cutting back on their own spending.
I think every government should be cutting spending rather than raising tax.
So you agree with Mr Dawkins' comments of a week or so ago about room for savings in education?
No, look, I don't think Mr Dawkins is in a position to lecture anybody or any government.
But do you agree with that point?
No, look, I agree with the broad proposition that governments, plural, should spend less as the first option for cutting outlays, and particularly against a background where the Australian family is cash-strapped. And particularly those, of course, who don't have any breadwinners. And if you're talking about increasing tax at a time when Australian earnings are, by latest indicators, starting to fall behind those of other developed countries, you are going to come up against very heavy opposition from the average Australian, and not surprisingly.
Isn't this an insurmountable problem? If people aren't earning enough, they can't be forced to pay more contributions into super, to have their taxes increased. I mean, there is a finite amount.
Well, that's the point I'm making, Edna, that you're getting you're running into a real brick wall as far as the further capacity to pay tax is concerned, and that is why increasingly governments are going to be forced back to paring back spending.
We'll continue with John Howard on Meet the Press in a moment.
How will new tax legislation affect you? A certified practicing accountant knows, because CPAs must constantly update their knowledge. Informed tax advice, that's how you'll profit from our experience.
You told Okamura this is our only chance to get the signature. Of course you did. Poor devil, he must be stressed.
NEC's Colour Ultralight Notebook is the only one with revolutionary pen technology.
I sign on screen?
Which enables you to write directly onto the screen.
Now, teach you to dance.
He got it.
Our vision is to make doing business so much easier. NEC.
We are the cash converters. We're the easy way to trade. We buy and sell all kinds of goods and your money's easily made. We're in your local suburb, yeah, we're not far away. When you buy or sell or trade, Cash Converters will make your day. Yeah, when you buy, sell or trade, Cash Converters will make your day. Cash Converters.
How will new tax legislation affect you? A certified practicing accountant knows, because CPAs must constantly update their knowledge. Informed tax advice, that's how you'll profit from our experience.
Congratulations, Evan Hughes, Jeopardy's latest super champ.
Good on you, mate.
And on Monday,
we start with 3 brand new maiden handicaps.
More cash on the line.
This is the show that gets you going.
Jeopardy, 6 o'clock Monday on 10.
This is Meet the Press tonight with John Howard. Amanda.
Laurie Brereton, Industrial Relations Minister, is planning to overhaul the entire industrial relations system, so they tell us. Have you given any preliminary thoughts to how the opposition is going to respond to this?
Well, I understand the main change they want to make is to give, possibly give non-unionists some right of enterprise bargaining. We'd agree with that very strongly because it's only fair.
But the trade-off would be
the trade-off would be to take away the secondary boycott protection. This is the law that I brought in that protects small businessmen from getting bashed up by unions that don't have any legitimate argument.
Trade unions might have a different description.
Well,
of
no, I mean,
well,
they just close small businesses down,
and the ILO says it's against the right to strike.
But the ILO says a lot of things that we don't necessarily agree with, although a lot of the work they do is very valuable. But I think most people would agree that if you're not in dispute with your workforce, but somebody you're trading with is in dispute with its workforce and your business gets closed down as a result, you've got a reason to complain, haven't you? And that basically is how it works. And I don't think that protection should be taken away, although obviously we would agree with the other part of it, which we think is a fundamental right.
It's also possible on union amalgamations, of course, that they'll overturn their original decision on that, which was to get so many big unions around the country.
Closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, of course. I mean, they're now amalgamated. Very hard to unscramble the egg.
What about your own industrial relations policy? You've indicated that the youth wage, which was something of a disaster as a concept, will be dropped. But will you go to the next election with the same policy, basically, as the one you took to the last election? Essentially, yes. I don't see any major reason for change other than the youth wage aspect of it. You've got to bear in mind that the circumstances in which the next election will be fought will be quite different from the last one, and that applies to all of our policies. And I don't think the government and the unions will be further away from our policy position by the time of our current policy position by the time of the next election. Therefore, it would be very strange if we started to wind it back. We may, in fact, pass each other in the night. So it'll be more saleable next time? It'll be more saleable next time? I don't think it was a major problem in the last election.
But the research on both sides showed that it certainly was a factor, wasn't it?
Not a big factor.
Well, then why have you dropped the youth wage? Because I think you recognise that that was a big factor.
Yes, I've acknowledged a problem with that. But, I mean, without wanting to go over and over the reasons for the last election defeat, the truth is that our post-election research overwhelmingly indicated problems with the GST. I mean, that was up here and everything else was down here, and Medicare came second.
The Labor Party says that one of the most important things for them was getting the trade unions out to work for them. And one of the reasons they got such a lot of support at the hustings was because of your industrial relations policies.
I mean, you don't really expect me to accept the Labor Party's version as to why we lost.
Well, they have won 5 elections on the hop.
But perhaps one of the reasons they've won 5 elections is that we keep listening to their version of what we oughtn't to have done and what we ought to do in the future.
Another version, perhaps, in superannuation. Don't you foresee some sort of logjam ahead in terms of the way superannuation's been sold, if you like? And that is, it's highlighted in the Fitzgerald report. On the one hand, you're asking people to put more money into superannuation. Then we're saying, no, the super funds are going to be more highly taxed. What are the unions going to feel about that? And also with the non-union funds and so on. Don't you think there's going to be a collision course here? We're pushing on one hand and saying, on the other hand, we're going to tax the super funds more highly?
Well, the package we put forward at the last election was a package, and it involved giving a lot of people greater inducements to go into superannuation. than exist at the present time. So there were trade-offs, and of course our approach to superannuation is a less prescriptive approach. We offer the inducements of tax concessions. We still believe quite strongly that giving the individual a tax incentive to go into superannuation is a superior way of going.
Rather than the employer.
We think it's better, much better, yes.
More widely on policy, isn't it going to be very difficult for the opposition to get together a credible and attractive tax policy for the next election after the debacle of the consumption tax? And
no, I don't believe so, Michelle.
Where does it go?
Well, one of the things it does is not sort of lock itself into something 2.5 years out from the next election, and
perhaps not provide much detail?
Ensures, well, I think, well, a lot of people would argue that.
Do you argue that?
I think you have to be careful of not getting overburdened with detail, but you've got to be careful.
So a slim policy next time.
You've got to equally be careful that you don't sort of go from one extreme to the other.
Aren't you being criticised for that at the moment, that you're seen as too remote, you're sort of out of the debate?
Well, I think to criticise us for anything at the moment is a bit rich. After all, it's only 3.5 months since the last election. The government has been caught out red-handed lying to the public about a whole range of things, and I think the opposition is perfectly entitled to try and exert some good old-fashioned political pressure on the government to come up to the mark. Well, I think a number of us are trying fairly hard, and I think the whole drift of our discussion tonight has been towards the political difficulties of the government.
Would you have a new view of unemployment now, since before the election? I mean, Mr Beazley said the other day he doesn't think we'll get back to, say, a 6% level of unemployment for 6 years. Do you think there is a new acceptable level of unemployment that we'll have to live with in a recovered economy? Oh,
I think most Australians some time ago gave up believing that you could ever go back to the 2% unemployment of my childhood.
So what do you think we'll have to live with in future? Is it going to be somewhere around 8 or 10?
I don't want to fix, so I would hate to think it were 8 or 10.
7?
Well, I don't want to get hung up on a figure, but there have been structural changes in the Australian economy. We now have an unemployed, sadly, we have an unemployed underclass, which is a consequence of well, a number of social factors. Family disintegration is one of the major reasons why we have an unemployed underclass in this country now. Some of the changes that have occurred in industry have meant the permanent abolition of jobs. I think we'll have to think a lot more laterally about unemployment as we go through the 90s, because getting it back to what we would regard as a socially tolerable level is going to be a damn sight harder.
5–6%?
Well, obviously much higher than what people in the 1950s and 60s thought was well, until Whitlam came along, we never had unemployment above 2%. I think...
Hardly his fault, though. It did happen worldwide.
Well, I don't know. Well,
he's not responsible for the family disintegration you're talking about.
Hang on. I mean, let's not rewrite history. We had unemployment of this country that never went over 2% until the early 1970s, and we have never returned to those days. Now, I don't want to spend the morning and the evening talking about golf, but it happens to be an historic fact.
We'll continue with John Howard on Meet the Press after this break.
This week on Hinch, the hoax cure created out of cruelty.
Do you know what these bears go through so you can obtain these substances?
I won't tell you anything.
Live bears that are factories for Chinese medical superstitions. Hinch, weeknights at 7 o'clock on 10.
This small business report is brought to you by my business partner.
Some people who receive a retrenchment or retirement payout move to buy a small business. It can be a great idea, but do your sums and make sure you don't pay too much. My friends in Queensland tell me Southerners are bidding up the price of businesses like coffee shops and committing themselves to virtual slavery to make them pay. Be certain that you understand what makes the business tick and that you have the talents and stamina to make a success of it.
Yellow Pages, your business partner. In an increasingly complex business world, whose advice can you trust? Certified practicing accountants must constantly update their knowledge. Informed business advice, that's how you'll profit from our experience.
Our guys are flying, gonna put them on the spot. There's no denying that our guys are
NBL Mitsubishi Challenge live basketball midday Sunday on 10.
There's a new investment that not only promises a good return, but promises to do some good too. Where your savings and interest are government guaranteed, where you choose the term, and where your savings work harder. Call 008 628 008.
You better draw back your bow and let your arrow go straight to my lover's heart for me.
Ah, the joys of selling something through a newspaper. Not to mention the cost and letting strangers into your home. There is a better way.
We are the cash converters.
If you have goods of value, your local cash converter will give you cash on the spot. Top prices are paid, and it's the friendly, convenient and easy way to convert your unwanted goods into instant cash. Forget the paper and sell your goods at a cash converter today.
Cash converters will make your day.
Cash converters.
In an increasingly complex business world, whose advice can you trust? Certified practicing accountants must constantly update their knowledge. Informed business advice, that's how you'll profit from our experience.
So, how secure is John Hewson's job, Edna?
Given the apparent tensions, if you like, in the Liberal Party, can we assume that you still have your baton in your knapsack, as the saying goes?
Look, I put my hand up after the election. That obviously was a statement about the leadership generally. The party decided to stay with John. I accept that decision, and I really can't be expected to say any more on the subject. I mean, everybody knew my position and my attitude, but these things are always in the hands of the party. And as far as I'm concerned, the decision was taken. I accept it. And that really is the end of the matter as far as I'm concerned.
But there are other names that have cropped up since then, like Bronwyn Bishop or the Deputy Leader, Michael Wool. Do you think it's a certainty that John Hewson would lead the Liberals into the next election?
The question of the leadership is always in the hands of the party, but I'll be doing what I can as part of his team. But so having sort of how to go, I mean, I can't really be expected. What more can I say?
But you wouldn't say for a certainty that John Hewson will be leader at the next election?
Look, that's a matter for the party, Michelle. I mean, I think...
well, that's another way of saying the question is still up in the air.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's just a statement of fact. I mean, I'm not really interested in sort of vague hypocrisies on this subject. I mean, John has been chosen. The party chose him. I accept that decision. I think everybody else should accept that decision and get on.
But Mr. Howard, the whole party is talking about leadership. Is that not true?
I've been away for a lot. I mean, I've had a bit of a chat.
You'll soon catch up.
Since I'm fairly good at catching up, Michelle. But I'm not going to sort of do more than state the obvious. He was re-elected. I accept that decision. It is always open to party rooms to change things. I'm not encouraging the party room to do that. I'm not suggesting it ought to.
You're not discouraging, are you?
Well, I'm rarely asked. Do you agree with Mr. Reith that the leader's job is always under scrutiny? Always under the spotlight?
I mean, look, everybody, whenever you're a leader of a party, it's always under scrutiny. I knew that when I was party leader. I think even, Paul Keating is in a very secure position because he's just won an election, but he's hardly top of the pops with the public either. His rating in that poll was 26%.
Have you given up your leadership ambitions forever?
Well, I certainly won't be organising any challenge against John Hewson.
Would you be a candidate if there was one?
Oh, look, Michelle, I'm not going to answer any more questions on that subject. I'm bored with it, and I think your listeners are bored with it, and I'm surprised all of you aren't bored with it.
Could we talk around a little bit? How can you convince, well, how can the Liberal Party present a convincing front of having distanced itself from Fightback and GST when it still has the same leader who fought so vigorously for that in an election and was defeated? How do you convince people that you're not going to whip that out the satchel next time round if you got in?
Oh, come on, Edna. I mean, the Labor Party's now led by a man who said that the GST was the salvation of Australia and then said it would be the poison of Australia. And he's still there, and most of you lot think he's doing a good job.
How are you going to handle the Bronwyn Bishop situation, problem, whatever?
Problem?
Well, Bronwyn Bishop said she wants to come down from the upper house and find a lower house seat. You've been involved in changing the pre-selection rules. How do you think?
Well, I'm arguing for changing the pre-selection rules.
How do you think she should get that seat?
I don't know. Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, if Bronwyn wants to have a go, good on her.
And you'd support her?
Well, I probably won't be on the pre-selection committee, but she'd have to run against a sitting member, because I don't know any of my colleagues who are about to retire.
You wouldn't give her your seat?
I think I'll do another term at least. And I don't think any of my colleagues are going to stand aside, so I think what will happen is that Bronwyn, if she wants to come into the lower house, she will have to nominate against a sitting member, but that's fair enough. I mean, I believe in competition.
Why do you think she's so popular with the public?
Well, I don't think anybody's very popular with the public at the moment.
Well, the latest polls show that she is very popular.
Well, hang
more
on,
popular than John Hewson.
Yeah, but I mean, I think...
Why do you think
I think the interesting thing about those latest opinion polls is that you have her on 18, me on 16 years, and 15 don't know 14. And you've got Keating on 26, Hawke 21, Jones 19 on the Labor Party side. You know what that says? It says
so
that
she's more popular than the leader?
No, well, it technically says that, although... hang on, but what it does say, even more importantly, it says that I don't think anybody's terribly popular at the present time on either side.
But why do you think she is so popular?
Oh, she had a lot of publicity. But look, very good.
Why isn't she popular in the party?
What do you mean?
She doesn't seem to be very popular with her colleagues.
Well, look, go and ask some of my colleagues. Go and ask her.
Do you think that John Hewson should put her, or have another attempt at getting her into the shadow ministry?
Oh, look, that's a matter for him and her.
But if you were leader, you would have her there,
Well, look, I'm not
you?
leader, and that's academic. That's a matter for Hewson and Bishop. Leave me out of that, please.
Do you believe perhaps she should try for a marginal seat, a Labor seat?
I'm not going to give any political counselling to my colleagues on this program.
Would she make a good Prime Minister?
What's your next question?
Would she?
It's academic.
Could I just broaden it and say, aren't you saying that the Liberal Party, after 10 years in the wilderness, needs some way of getting new blood in the way that, say, the Labour Party had already collected a bright young bunch 10, 12 years ago that got into power? They might be tired now.
Yeah, this new blood theory is a bit is interesting. I mean, Paul Keating's been in Parliament 5 years longer than I have. And most people say that the reason the Labor Party has done so well in the last couple of elections is that they have a great depth of political experience, and that one of the reasons Keating has done so well is that he's been around for a long time and he understands the alleys and the byways of politics. I think the point I was making, Edna, is that all around the world at the present time, leadership is in something of a discount, and that no leader on any side of politics anywhere in the world commands that sort of messianic respect.
No, I don't think it's part of the times of the day.
That used to be in the 80s.
Mm.
After the break, John Howard's views on Mabo.
We've been through some tough times, but we all pitched in and we made it. In fact, we're even looking to expand, give some young kids in the district a go, you know. Then when we grow more, well, we'll see. To get things moving, you've really got to start somewhere.
There's a new investment that not only promises a good return, but promises to do some good too, where your savings and interest are government guaranteed, where you choose the term, and where your savings can work harder and earn up to 7.6%. Look in tomorrow's newspapers or call 008 628 008. Government Bonds of Victoria, working for us all.
It's about people. That's what it's about.
Cupid, draw back your bow and let your arrow go straight to my lover's heart for me. Nobody but me. Cupid, please hear my cry and let your arrow fly straight to my lover's heart for me.
20th
Century Fox presents Charlie Sheen, Lloyd Bridges, Valeria Golino.
All the missions, you had to come walking into this one.
It's a sequel. I had to come.
And Saddam Hussein as himself. Hot Shots 2.
Yo, here it is, and there you are. Take it nice and slow. Yo, no pain, no strain, no stress. Beautiful one day, perfect the next.
What would you say to a Sun Lover 3-night holiday at Hayman for this great Queensland prize?
Yo, way to go.
A shock for Gwen.
What are you doing?
A surprise for Roxanne.
I have never stopped loving you.
In a special 2-hour season finale.
She's lying?
That's right.
They've saved their best till last. LA Law, 8:30 Tuesday on 10.
John Howard and Mabo. Michelle.
Mr. Howard, Hugh Morgan the other day made some controversial remarks about dominant cultures inevitably taking over from less dominant ones. Do you agree with Mr. Morgan's remarks? What is your view on this?
Well, I certainly, like Voltaire, strongly defend his right to contribute to this debate. And I've got to say, Michelle, that one of the regrettable things about this whole debate is this cultural McCarthyism that's crept into Australian politics, whereby if anybody says something that's not part of the current conventional wisdom about matters of race or ethnicity or some other subjects, instead of the substance of their argument being attacked, they are belted over the head with a bit of 4B2 on the basis that they're a racist or an extremist. Now, there are a lot of things said in this debate that I don't agree with. I don't know that I agree with everything Hugh Morgan said. Although
you agree with some of it?
Well, some of the comments he made were, well, he said that the decision has caused a lot of insecurity and unease in the mining.
Do you agree with his attack on the High Court?
Well, I, as a lawyer and an Australian, I mean, I believe in the rule of law, and my view is that when the High Court has made a declaration of the law, unless the parliaments of this nation resolve to change it, you obviously have to accept it, and that applies to everybody, not just to me, but it applies to everybody. But there's nothing wrong with a citizen advocating that the effect of a High Court decision be reversed by legislation.
So who's guilty of the cultural McCarthyism?
No, I think many people on the government side are in this debate. I mean, Tickner on AM, that following Morgan's attack, spent 5 or 8 minutes berating his motives, berating him for being an extremist and having gone over the top, instead of addressing the substance of the argument. And I think we run a very grave danger in this country that the genuine sort of commitment to free speech we have is being severely restricted by this, what I call this cultural McCarthyism. You smear somebody as a racist rather than address the substance of what they have to say.
Talking about the substance, do you believe that there should be a national response to Mabo, or do you believe the states should go their own way on it?
Well, I would prefer to see a national response because it is a national issue, but one of the problems with getting a national response is that the Prime Minister has deliberately politicised the Mabo decision. My reading of the Mabo decision tells me that it has a more narrow application than some of the things that have been said about it by a number of people since the decision was brought down.
So you don't believe it should be linked with any sort of reconciliation
No, I
process?
don't. I agree very much with the approach that John Hughes and Michael Woolridge have taken in that respect. I'd be surprised myself if too many claims on the mainland of Australia were proved on the basis of the Mabo decision because of the narrow terms of it. And I think most Australians want to see some kind of understanding with Aboriginal Australians, but you won't get that by approaching this issue on the basis of historic guilt. I think the only way you can tackle the Aboriginal issue is to remedy modern day disadvantage and modern day wrongs. Now,